Dear faithful brothers and sisters, I want to thank you all for the opportunity of my being able to address you tonight. Thank you to Sitbazan and the Religious Council. Thank you to Shant and to the Meslop and the cathedral staff. The only regret that I have is I'm not being able to be there directly with you in person. But please indulge me as I talk a little bit about this theme of fishermen and fishers of men. So I'm sure you've all heard the story written in the scriptures about a critical event in the life of Jesus and his ministry. The particular story is found in both the Gospel of Matthew and that of Mark. And you can see a representation of it behind me. It goes like this. After Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River, he went out into the wilderness for 40 days to prepare for his imminent ministry. He spent his time in fasting and in prayer. It was at the end of this time that Jesus found himself, if you remember, being tempted by Satan. And despite the fact that he had not consumed anything for those 40 days and was a physical mess in a totally weakened state, he was nevertheless able to withstand and stymie Satan's attempts to make him do his will instead of God's will. So after this ordeal, we read, Jesus was on his way home to Nazareth, walking along the beach of the Sea of Galilee, when he saw two brothers, Simon, who was later renamed Peter, and Andrew. They were fishing, throwing their nets into the lake as they did day after day, trying to make a living. This was their daily routine. They were fishermen after all. Jesus purposefully approached them and said, "Come with me, and I will make a new kind of fisherman out of you. You will no longer be fishermen, but fishers of men. And I'll show you how to catch men and women instead of tilapia, carp, and catfish." The interesting thing here is that they didn't hesitate one bit, didn't even ask questions, but simply dropped their nets and what they were doing and followed Jesus. A short distance down the beach, they came upon another pair of brothers, James and John, sons of a man named Zebedee. These two were sitting in a boat with their father, mending their fish nets. When Jesus called them in the same way, they were just as quick to follow, abandoning boat, nets, and father to become Jesus' followers. So in light of the current year being proclaimed the year of human resource preparation, I believe one of the most glaring shortages of martuj, as His Holiness has identified it, manpower, is the shortage of clergy, not only in our prelacy, but indeed throughout the world. His Holiness writes that beside the family, the second place of martuj, manpower preparation, human resources, is the church. The church is the forge where our spiritual, moral, and national values are preserved and the source of their realization and revitalization. Many of the elderly of our nation, he continues, have immersed themselves in the life and testimony of the church and received the zeal and commitment to serve the nation and motherland from the church. Through various initiatives, Sunday school, Bible study, adult seminars, and religious education classes, it is necessary for our church to fulfill its spiritual mission and service to the nation hand in hand with impelling the church's work of training and education. Then he goes on to talk about the seminary. He says, the seminary of the Holy See continues to remain the place where the formation of clergy, teachers, and intellectuals who have a calling to serve the church and nation filled with spiritual and intellectual values takes place. In this way, the seminary has made great strides over the past many decades. Indeed, the fact that many of those who have passed through the seminary are now present throughout Armenia and the diaspora, and are now actively involved in the realm of our spiritual, educational, and cultural life throughout the world, globally, is an eloquent testimony to the singular mission that has been allotted by the seminary. So looking at what Veapar has written, it behooves us to recognize that while we have the facilities to prepare future leaders and servers within the ranks of our clergy, we don't have enough bodies to take advantage of those venerable institutions around the world whose job it is to prepare our spiritual fathers. We just don't have enough people, especially here, who are willing to take on the mantle that is the mantle of being a pastor in a church, taking care of people. So in order to prepare the next generation of clergy, we first need to recruit them. Now, the clergy shortage is not a new phenomenon within the Armenian church. What we are experiencing today is partially the result of what happened at the beginning of the last century when the Turks began in earnest to destroy any and all traces of the existence of Armenians in Turkish lands or lands that were occupied by Turkey through destruction of churches and through the murder of priests. Often, the first casualties of an incursion into an area which was singled out for destruction were the village priests. In the larger cities, these may have included bishops and archimandrites, vartabets. But in the smaller villages, they would have been the married priest, the kahanas, who took care of the village's parishioners. Before being killed, these brave men were often subjected to public humiliation and torture in order to terrorize and demoralize the people so that they would be more compliant with their own deaths. Thus, thousands of Armenian clergy of all ranks were killed during the Hamidian massacres and the Armenian genocide perpetrated by both the Ottoman Empire and later the Republic of Turkey. Now, as diasporan Armenian communities sprang up through the world, because of the displacement of so many during those days of horror and terror, there were nowhere near enough priests to accommodate new communities being organized, nor existing ones that suddenly blossomed with a huge refugee population in the Middle East, Europe, and the Americas. The renowned centers of Armenian apostolic religious education and clergy preparation, the seminaries at Sis and Armash, had been decimated. Shortly thereafter, the Kevorkian Seminary of the Holy See was temporarily closed to accommodate massive numbers of refugees sheltering at Holy Echmiadzin. And of course, after the Sovietization of Armenia, the seminary remained mostly closed and was not allowed to reopen fully until 1940. It wasn't until 1930 that the seminary of the Great House of Cilicia was reestablished in Antilyas, in Lebanon, on the tract of land on the shores of the beautiful Mediterranean, which became the new home of the Cilician Catholicate. The Holy Cross Seminary in Constantinople remained open until 1932, when it was closed, but then reopened in 1950 as a high school and seminary. In 1967, the seminary portion was permanently closed by the Turkish government. As far as I know, the only seminary of the Jerusalem, the only seminary that remained open was the seminary of the Jerusalem Patriarch, active and operative throughout those difficult years. So because of the genocide, we have lost thousands of priests and potential priests through death, attrition, and the closure of seminaries. Fortunately, today, 5 theological learning centers are operative throughout the world. The Kevorkian Seminary in Echmiadzin, the Vazgenyan Theological Seminary in Sevan, Armenia, the Seminary of the Catholicosate of Cilicia in Bikfaya, the St. James Seminary in Jerusalem, and the St. Nerses Seminary in New York. Despite the reestablishment of these institutions, however, the shortage of clergy throughout the world, and especially here in our prelacy in the Eastern United States, remains critical. Ever since the beginning of my service to the church, more than 50 years ago, when I first requested to attend the Antiyas Seminary to prepare for the priesthood, there have been numerous occasions when our prelacy has made special efforts to recruit young men for service in the church, placing singular emphasis on recruitment of native-born candidates. Since that time, we have had 6 priests born and raised in the United States ordained in our prelacy, and several more that had settled here at a very young age and were raised in this country, some having done military service for the United States. In 1988, when Oshagan Sirpazant assumed the office of prelate, he implemented an aggressive program to recruit clergy both from candidates who were living in the United States and those living abroad. His Eminence was very successful in his recruitment efforts, and for some years, at least during the 20 years of his service, we had no shortages. With the election of Archbishop Anushavan in 2018, the same aggressive plan was pursued, however, with limited success, due mostly to travel and immigration restrictions by the State Department and Homeland Security, and of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. Recently, Sirpazan and the Religious Council decided to take steps to reinvigorate our clergy training program and find new candidates for priesthood who will serve the Armenian community within the Eastern United States. Now, this is where you all come in, where we all come in. Finding and recruiting candidates is not just the job of the prelate, other clergy, or councils, but a task for all of us to accomplish together. After all, those who will benefit from the services provided by a priest are you, the faithful. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you should go out and actively recruit candidates door to door. What I am saying is that you should be encouraging and gracious to children and young men who express a desire to enter the priesthood, helping to foster that dream rather than destroy it. Might sound a little cynical, but I want to explain why. This may sound weird, but when I decided at a pretty early age, even before high school, that I wanted to be a priest, whenever I expressed this desire to people in our community, invariably, the typical answer would be, "Oh no, merkes das." Thus, people, maybe unwittingly, actually tried to discourage me from being a priest because tejvarik, it's hard. Even other Derhais often tried to discourage me, and believe me, that much discouragement could have made me have big-time second thoughts. But thankfully, I listened to God rather than the men and women who unwittingly were trying to discourage me. And as a result, next month will mark the 48th anniversary of my ordination. And the people who tried to discourage me didn't do so out of malice, but more perhaps from outdated memories and stories from the old country about financial challenges maybe faced by clergy in small rural communities, and perhaps the difficulties in dealing with parishioners who felt that they were entitled. Of course, that just didn't happen in the old country. But I was determined not to lose my vision of being a modern deadhead with a college degree, a good understanding of religion. I minored it in college, armed with the experience of growing up and serving in the church, thanks to my parents, who, by the way, were not too thrilled by my decision to enter the priesthood. But part of my desire to go into the priesthood, and I think this is important, was the clergy I had the honor of knowing. They were very inspirational for me, and I grew to love them as fathers and grandfathers. Der Moses, der Arsen, der Chachadur, der Torkom, and yes, der Mushech, all had their pastoral hand on my shoulder and helped guide me through life and to clearly hear God's call. Der Mushech was the pastor for many years at the cathedral after he left Worcester. I'll never forget the day when I was at morning service and some of our deacons weren't there. But we were on one side of the tas together, singing the Sharagan Aravot Buso in antiphon with the other tas. Just before the other deacons stopped singing their verse so that it would shift over to our verse, their Mushach turned to me and said, I have to go do something. And he just walked away, left me. He knew I could sing it. He knew I knew the words, the melody, and that I was very shy and would have never done that had he not put me in that situation. And yes, I did sing the next verse with much chagrin. But that's an example of how I was encouraged by my deadhead to get more involved in the life of the church. So you all need to be encouraging. Times have changed somewhat, thanks to a new generation of clergy who served the people faithfully and showed to their flock the brighter side, the lighter side of being a deadhead. So now we must be encouraging of those who reveal a call to the priesthood, who wish to serve God by serving his people. Today, most, if not all the priests, Sutpazan would know, serving in our prelacy, have college degrees, many with graduate degrees in various disciplines. Our clergy today are erudite, literate, professional, and capable people. For this reason, we must not just encourage them with words, but also with our actions. When I first began my service in a small community in 1976, I did encounter financial difficulties. The small church could not afford much by way of salary or benefits, and there were no guidelines for clergy at that time as to how much they should be receiving. But to be fair, they tried their best to compensate their clergy over the years. Still, if Yeretskin did not have her own career as a professional certified educator, we would not have survived. I'd like to share a story with you. As a new priest in the mid to late 1970s, I was invited to be a lecturer at the AYF Junior Seminar being held at that time in Ohio. It was a wonderful experience for me, and I will never forget one episode from one of the years that I was at seminar. I was engaging a group of young people. They were maybe preteen, teenage boys who began asking me in earnest questions about being a priest. They seemed very interested and were asking me all sorts of questions about being a priest. Why did I want to be a priest? What did I have to do to become a priest? What do I do as a priest? It thrilled me to no end that I could engage these enthusiastic youngsters about the priesthood and perhaps even get them to consider it as a valid career choice. It was truly exciting until one of the group asked me literally the $1,000 question. How much did I earn? Now, at that time, you have to realize I was a bit naive, uninformed even, and pretty uncaring, to be honest, about financial matters. So I told them what I made. And in that instant, in the twinkling of an eye, so to speak, the whole mood changed. It was like someone hit the light switch and the room got dark. Now, these kids were smart and savvy, and as soon as I told them what I made, all the enthusiasm, the interest, the questions, all stopped. Come to find out, I looked this up recently. At that time, I was making about half of what the median household income was for that particular year, 1977, 1978. Now, this story illustrates the need for our faithful to treat their college-educated, smart, dedicated pastors as the professionals they are by compensating them fairly according to their service. Over the years, the prelacy has set guidelines which offer very equitable compensation. But your job in the communities is to get involved and make sure the provisions of those guidelines are fully implemented in your parish by making sure that the stream of funding needed continues to pour into the church. While no one becomes a clergyman to get rich, every husband, father, head of household, clergy or not, has to think about meeting the needs of his family and doing what he has to do in order to accomplish that. By helping to improve this peace of mind, you truly encourage those who are thinking about becoming priests. You see, it is God's, indeed, it is God who calls us to the priesthood. He calls fishermen and changes them to fishers of men. Yet he also expects involvement of all the faithful within our churches to encourage those who have been called. For that, in turn, is your calling. To inspire by words, to encourage by actions, and to embolden by prayers. As Jesus said in Luke chapter 10, verse 2, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, pray to God to send out workers into the harvest field. Amen, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Derhair. I can hear Derhair for hours. Such a good speaker. Let's take a few minutes. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask Derhair your question. Maybe you want to enlist your grandson or your son for to attend seminary. Yes. Yes, Chris.
Yeah, it's me, Chris Parnagian. Oh, Baljian. All right, man.
That's Chris Parnagian, Derhair.
Yes, yeah, I heard.
Yes, so priests are, of course, licensed professionals, and some tasks that a priest does are perhaps easy. Some tasks are hard. What are the hard tasks that a priest has? Is it preparing for to give acados? Is it helping people with confession? Is it doing 5 funerals in 1 week? What are the stresses and strains, and what's the difficult part of the job?
Yes, to all of those. I mean, you did a better job than me of identifying those. After 48 years, I still get butterflies in my tummy on Saturday night. Before I go to bed and know I'm going to wake up and I have to be on, not just for the badarak, but also for the karos. When you're a professional dad, it is tough to have 5 funerals in 1 week. And believe me, I've had that. In fact, I've had 6. But God helps you get past those things, I think. And I think you help yourself by putting to use your professional background, what you've learned. Try to be not aloof, but very objective, because otherwise it's very difficult. I just did the wake tonight of a young man who was in his 50s, and I did his wedding. He died suddenly in his home, and it was really, really a tragic thing. And I knew him well, and it's very difficult. But when I get there, when I do my prayers, when I give my eulogy, somehow God helps me to tamp all the emotion down and do my job as a professional, comfort the family, speak about the person in terms that will comfort them. It's often more difficult to visit the living who are sick, who are near to death, young and old. Although I must say, the couple of times that I have been with people who have slipped away quietly, older people, reading to them, praying with them, have been a comforting time to me. But to go and see young people, young cancer victims, and visiting them and praying with them. Recently, we had at Shriners Burn Center in Boston, several young men from Artsakh who had been burned rather severely in the gasoline depot explosion, if you remember.
Yeah.
And thank God they did miraculous work there. And of the 4 that were treated there, 3 have gone home. There was only, I think, 1 came more recently, and is doing better. But it was horrible for them, and it was difficult to see that. So those are the kinds of things.
Thank you.
It's not the running around, the work. One thing that I don't like is meetings, by the way. So, it's pretty much shows that I'm, maybe should have thought about that when I chose this profession, because my life is taken up with meetings, especially in Boston, but it's okay.
Okay. Yes, please. Armin? Of course.
Is that they're seeing? Can you see us? No. Anyway.
I can see you, actually.
Okay, great. Hi there. This is Nadik Seferian. I was a student in the Boston area many years
Nadik.
ago. Yes, we met a few times. Very nice to see
Yes,
you. And
good to see you.
very nice to hear your voice. I was wondering about the differences between celibate and married priests, whether those are different kinds of callings, whether it takes a different kind of fishing, to pursue those paths, and how those two, if it makes a difference on how they relate to their community, married priests versus celibate priests. Thanks.
I think definitely that has a bears on the relationship between unmarried person to a community and a married person to a community. And I'm, there's not the same level of experience of raising a family. Everything is on a higher intellectual level, but I know that my being a married priest certainly has helped me over the years counsel couples who are going to get married, because I could speak to them out of experience, not out of how things should be, but how things really are. I think the same goes with children and the like, which is why it's not usual to have a celibate priest as a long-term pastor in a church. When a celibate priest comes, takes care of a church, he's usually called a dean, or and usually there's a pastor by his side. And of course, I always joke about this. I always say, every priest has to make a choice: kabazan or wife. So, I don't know how many people, whatever the choice they made, have regretted it. I haven't. I haven't regretted my choice. So,
Thank you, Dennis.
okay.
Anyone else? Yes.
Hello.
One more question there.
Okay.
I'm not very familiar with the Armenian church or the religion. I just came here to learn. I was wondering if there are priests that live completely in isolation in Armenian church.
I don't think so. And historically there have been, but I don't know of any now.
Okay.
Jiknavos, we call them in Armenian. Hermits. I don't know any of any.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Anyone else?
Armenians are gregarious people. I don't like being alone.
All right. Very good. Thank you very much, Derhayr.
Thank you, Shant. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your all being there.